Welcome to App Stories, a weekly exploration of the world of apps. Today's show is brought to you by Balance and Readle. I'm John Voorhees, and with me is my co-host, Federico Viticci. Hi, Federico.
Hey, John. How's it going?
Oh, it's going pretty well. What do you want to talk about today? I think we're gonna do drag and drop today, right?
I think it would be nice if we take a look at one specific feature of iOS 11 that I think will have probably the biggest impact, especially on iPad apps. And in case you didn't read my iOS 11 review, which I would totally understand because it's not something that you can get to in 10 minutes. But if you read the review, you can see that the drag and drop section of the iPad chapter is the biggest one in the story.
Right.
And the reason is that I truly believe that drag and drop between multiple apps on the iPad is really transformative on iOS. And it really changes the way that you work with multiple apps at the same time. And so I thought we should talk about this because it's gonna change the way that we work on our iPads. I don't know if you feel the same, John, but at least for me, I've been doing a lot of drag and drop lately, and it really does improve a lot of workflows.
It does, and I think it takes a little getting used to, too, because for a couple of reasons. One, like, for instance, you and I are used to using a lot of workflows that use URL schemes and things like that, and that was a way of pushing information around between apps for a really long time. And you really don't need to do that nearly as often anymore with drag and drop. So that's one thing you have to kind of wrap your head around. You don't really have to go to the share sheet and fire off some sort of workflow that sends a piece of information somewhere and then maybe bops you back to another app. You don't have to do that. And also, if you're a Mac user like I am, you have to kind of start wrapping your head around how drag and drop is a little different, because drag and drop is there's a lot more you can do because you have 10 fingers on the screen at one time, and you can move different things in different ways that you couldn't really accomplish on a Mac because it's just not built that way with either a touchpad or a trackpad or a mouse.
Yeah, there's a big difference between drag and drop on the Mac and iOS, even if technically they are the same feature. But just by looking at the framework and the way that Apple built this API, it's clear that it's
Right.
obviously a new beginning for drag and drop. It's a fresh start. It's the framework is all new, and the way that it works on iOS truly takes advantage of multi-touch and multiple fingers to enhance the experience. And before we get to the examples of few apps that we want to mention and to discuss, I think it would be useful to provide some context as to how drag and drop works and why it's been built this way.
Yeah, no, I think that's a good idea because it's definitely, you're right. While it's going to be familiar from anyone who's ever used a Mac before,
Right.
It's still implemented differently, and it has some features that are just different in the way that they're implemented than you would have on a Mac, for instance. So it's worth going through it. And having done the review, why don't you walk us through a couple of those things?
All right. So let's do this all over again. So this is something that the Mac and iOS have in common, that when you drag something across multiple apps, the drag itself, so the thing you see on screen moving, you're not actually dragging a file, but the drag operation, Apple describes it as a promise, in that on the iPad, when you pick up a photo and you drag it over Mail, the moment that you're still dragging on screen, that your finger is on the screen and it's moving this photo on screen, Mail doesn't see the photo. It's not able to see, oh, Federico is dragging a photo of an espresso cup. No, it only sees a description of the item. It doesn't see the actual JPEG of the photo. It only sees something. This happens in the code inside the framework, but in plain English, it sees something like, this is a JPEG, and that's about it.
Right.
It doesn't see the
Right.
metadata. It doesn't see the size of the photo. It doesn't even see the file name. It only sees the type. It says the user right now is dragging an item, and that item happens to be a JPEG. And this works for all kinds of things that you drag on iOS 11. If you select some text on a web page in Safari and you go over the compose field in Twitter doesn't see the contents of the text that you selected. It doesn't even see the web page where they came from. It only sees, well, this text is plain text or rich text or a link, because iOS 11 also exposes the link of the original web page. So the idea is, when you drag something, the receiver app only sees a summary of what it will receive eventually. And that eventually part is defined by you lifting the finger. So the moment that you lift your finger, the promise becomes an action and the item is actually delivered to the destination. But as you're still hovering over apps, you're not exposing anything to them, just a summary of what the item is. And this is important for two reasons. One is performance. Because imagine if you had to drag like a 2 GB movie, between apps, there would need to be a lot of caching involved just to generate the preview of the drag item. And also, what if apps were able to parse and to read the contents of the item as you're still moving on screen? Imagine moving your finger on screen and you're holding a 2 GB piece of data, and that would most definitely impact performance. But the second reason why this kind of design matters is that for privacy reasons. Imagine that you're holding a photo of your partner and you're hovering over the Facebook app. Hadn't Apple built drag and drop this way, Facebook would be able to see your photo and to do something with it, to do anything with it. I'm not saying that they would do it, but they would be capable of doing it. And we've seen how third-party companies in the past have abused iOS APIs for privacy intrusion techniques or even advertisements. And
Right.
this way, Facebook doesn't see your photo. It doesn't see the file name. It doesn't see the metadata. It just sees this is a photo and just the most generic description that it can be.
If nothing else, you could see a situation where maybe you're on a family vacation to Florida and you're dragging this photo from Florida over to Facebook, and then you decide not to do it, but Facebook's read that it was, the
Right.
location data that you were in Florida, and all of a sudden you're seeing advertisements for Florida all over the place.
Exactly.
That kind of thing, right?
Yes, exactly. That would not be possible because Facebook cannot see unless you drop the photo, but only if you're hovering over the compose field, it doesn't see anything about it. So that would not be possible.
Right.
And I think Apple is right in doing this. There's also another aspect that we need to consider, and this will come up, I bet, as more and more apps adopt these rich drag and drop implementations. When you drag something, developers of the source app, they can provide multiple versions of what you're dragging. So one obvious example is Apple Mail. In Apple Mail in iOS 11, you can pick up a message from the email inbox and you can drop it somewhere else. Now, when you hover with a message over a destination app, there's multiple flavors of that message that can be received. You can either drop the subject line in plain text, or you can drop the subject line in rich text because it will be a link that will take you back to the original message, or you can even drop the entire contents of the body text of the message. And this is done through a system based on UTIs, which means universal type identifiers. This is a standard way to describe data like JPEGs or PNGs or PDFs or email messages. The UTIs are a plain English description of an item.
Right, and they've been around for a very long time.
Yes, they're used everywhere on the Mac, on non-Apple platforms. It's an industry standard to describe formats, file formats, basically.
Right.
And this matters on iOS because not only drag and drop will change depending on the apps that you're using, but developers can be clever about this. And for example, if you select, let's say, an image in Safari and from a web page, you tap and hold on an image in a web page. If you drop that image into Photos, you will save the image. You will basically add the photo to your library.
Right.
But if you hold that image and you drop it somewhere where a link is expected, so a URL is expected, you will not get an error, but you will open the link to the image. Because drag and drop is smart enough to say, well, this image can be interpreted in two ways. It can either be an image file, or it can be the link to the image itself. And what drag and drop on iOS 11 does behind the scenes is it figures out what the best format for the current destination is. And you don't have to think about any of this. It just happens automatically behind the scenes. But I bring it up because there will be inconsistencies. As more and more apps adopt drag and drop, you will likely find yourself asking the question, why was I thinking that I would get rich text and instead right now I have plain text? Or why is this message turned into a PDF where I just wanted a link to the message? And I
Right.
bet that these problems will come up because any invisible system that lacks any kind of user control or user customization has to make assumptions. And right now, developers are making these assumptions. And there will be these cases where you were expecting something and drag and drop delivered something slightly different.
Yeah, it's kind of related to an issue that I know you and Mike and Steven talked a little bit about on Connected, which is when you're in the Files app and you pick a document, say you pick a text document, a TXT document, and all of a sudden Google Drive opens, perhaps, right? Which is what you guys were talking about as an issue, because that app seems to open just about anything and has become a little bit of a problem for some people on iOS 11.
Yeah.
The problem is that the system is not transparent. And it's the same thing with drag and drop. You don't really know what's going to happen until you actually drop.
Yeah. And I should say that for the most part, I think drag and drop is doing a better job at making assumption as to what type of data should be transferred than Files is.
Right.
Both systems are based largely on the UTI approach of let's take a look at the file format and let's decide where this file or this string of text should go. But I think drag and drop, because of the way it's structured, it works better than Files does right now.
Yeah.
But what I want to stress is that I wanted to explain this, but normal people should never know any of this because first, there's no interface for this. It's just something that happens behind the scenes. You don't have to know about UTIs. You don't have to know about apps talking to each other this way. But I think it's important, especially if you're an iOS power user, if you're using iOS as your primary computer, and especially the iPad. I think it's important to know when you see some errors, when you see some inconsistencies, now you know why that's the case. It's because drag and drop deals with items that are most likely advertised in multiple variations. For example, a drawing from your favorite sketching app can be a vector format or a JPEG or a PNG or a custom file type. And if you ever drop that sketch into something else and you wanted a PDF and instead of it's a PNG, this is why.
Yeah, I agree. And it's one of those things where it's, if you think about it kind of as a hierarchy of items, how it can be represented, it helps a little bit. Because for instance, text is that way for sure. You're dragging a piece of text and what it could either maybe dragged it out of notes and it's a bulleted list with bold and italics and everything. Okay, you could end up with the rich text version of that. You could get the plain text version of that. It could come out as a PDF. You could even, I suppose, turn the text into an image, but that would be probably the least expected of the bunch. But there are a lot of different options, and what has to happen is both the developer whose app that's coming from and the recipient have to kind of anticipate what is the most useful version of that when you're dragging it somewhere and dropping it.
Yeah, basically the source app, Apple says that the source app needs to advertise to expose the highest fidelity format first.
Right.
So the best version has to be the first one in the list. And then in descending order of fidelity, all the other compatible formats. So for example, a sketching app would have the custom data format first, followed by PDF, which is another scalable vector format, and then maybe PNG, and finally JPEG, which is the worst one. Ultimately, it comes down to how well developers can be flexible in the implementation. For example, once Ulysses supports drag and drop, I want to see if the developers are smart enough and flexible enough to build a system where you can either drop in plain text or markdown text, but also if you select some text from a web page in Safari and it's a rich text and you drop it into Ulysses, will it be converted to rich text by the app, by Ulysses, or will you just drop in plain text without any formatting? And that comes down to how flexible developers are and how they need to do more custom work, for sure. They need to account for a lot more variables in the system. But I think the more powerful apps will do this.
Yeah, I agree. And I think the hard part about it is, when you talk about the highest fidelity version, what might be the highest fidelity version for one person might differ to another person, or
Yes.
depending on the task, right? Because you may want to be dragging your image into a particular app that you've got that only handles PNGs and doesn't handle JPEGs. So in that instance, JPEG would be the worst possible thing you could get, and you really want the PNG. And so it is a little bit difficult to do that, but I'm hopeful that we'll see some good implementations. Thanks to Balance for sponsoring App Stories this week. Balance is a wallet for all the world's currencies and tokens. You may have heard about cryptocurrencies like Bitcoin and some of the newer ones like Ethereum. There's a lot of buzz around cryptocurrencies and blockchain apps, but not that many people are using them yet. Balance is going to change that. Balance is a beautifully designed Mac app that sits in your menu bar, giving you quick access to all your financial accounts and blockchain balances in one place. It's a one-stop destination. Whether it's a bank down the street or your Bitcoin balance, you can access all of it in this handy app. There's also an iOS app in the works that's coming soon and will allow you to access your balances from your iPhone or iPad too. Balance has a special offer just for App Stories listeners. Just go to bal.money/appstories to claim $2 worth of Ether in a Coinbase account that you can link with Balance and view on your Mac menu bar. It's a great way to get started with cryptocurrencies and see just how easy Balance makes it to work with them. Once again, that's bal.money/appstories. There'll be a link in the show notes too. Thanks again to Balance for supporting the show.
Do you want to talk about some apps?
Yeah, let's talk about some of the examples that we have. I think one of the things that you raised, which is what are you going to get when the information drops when you drag something into another app? And PDF Viewer, I think, is an interesting one to look at because it's the only app that I think I've seen where if you drag something into it, it actually pops up a contextual menu. So you drag in some text and it pops up the contextual menu for all the tools that you can use to edit text within PDF Viewer. It's not quite the same as if you were dragging in the text, and it doesn't really ask you, well, do you want this to be an image versus do you want it to be text or rich text versus plain text? But I like that it pops up a contextual menu and lets you drop right into editing the thing that you've dragged into the app.
Oh, yeah, that's nice. I've always wanted developers to do this kind of stuff. Depending on what item is dropped, they present different menus.
Right.
I also understand why Apple maybe doesn't want something like this. So tell me about OneWriter, because I haven't used the app in a while. So, but I know that they have an iOS 11 update.
They do, and does a couple of different things that updates for iOS 11. One is the open in place feature, which we've talked about before, where you can open up a document that's in a file provider. Like for us, when we were working on Mac Stories, Working Copy or Dropbox or whatever it is, and you make the changes in there, they're preserved back to the original app where it's stored. But in terms of drag and drop, what it does is you can take any file that's in the Files app and drag it straight into OneWriter to edit it, or you can drag in text from another document and it appends it to the bottom, just kind of does like a note, or you can drag text out. I mean, it's fairly simple in its implementation of drag and drop, but it is just editing text, so it works very well. I mean, I started out using OneWriter a lot when I was first writing at Mac Stories. I don't use it nearly as often now, but I do like the implementation that they've got.
I've been liking the implementation of drag and drop in Fantastical, both on the iPhone and the iPad. So you can drop in text to create new events. And this also works in TimePage, which is another calendar client that we like.
Right.
At Mac Stories, we reviewed a bunch of versions of the app. And in Fantastical, in addition to dropping in text to create events, you can also export events and reminders from the app. So you can hold on an event in your list or a reminder, and you can drop it somewhere else to either export like the text, the title of the event, or even I'm pretty sure that if the destination supports it, you can export an ICS file to directly export the event, like to Apple Calendar, for example, if you want to move events between calendars. So if you have Fantastical and Calendar open at the same time. What I also like a lot is that both on the iPhone and the iPad, you can do stuff within the app. So you can reschedule events, and you can either tap and hold on an event and you can move it up and down in the list, in the vertical list on the left on the iPad and the main list on the iPhone. And you can basically, when you're hovering with the event under your finger, you will see like a red highlight across the day that you're currently hovering over.
Mm-hmm.
And so you can drop the event and and it'll get assigned to that day. So it's a nice way to scroll vertically in the list with an event that you're holding. But you can also move over to the day ticker, which is the horizontal bar at the top of the app, and you can drop an event onto a day in the day ticker itself. So what I like about that is that the day ticker is easier to use than the calendar list, because the top targets are bigger and the days are bigger. You can more comfortably drop an event in there to reschedule it instantly, which is really, really nice.
Yeah, that is nice. And I think that's a really good use case for drag and drop. Another one that I know that we've talked about a little bit, so I won't spend a lot of time on it, is Castro, because Castro is one of the single best drag and drop apps that I've seen for iOS 11, especially because it's an iPhone only app, but it makes great use combining both custom colors and animations and haptic feedback, all to give you a real sense of what you're doing, manipulating the shows that you listen to in Castro, which is a podcast player. You can grab multiple episodes by picking them up while you're dragging. You can drag them into your queue, or you could drag them to the archive, and you can do things with the shows that are lined up along that bar at the top of the app and bring it in. And the Supertop team put together a really nice video that just goes through all the different aspects of how drag and drop has been implemented in that app. And it's really, it's a video that I think anybody who is working on drag and drop for an app really ought to take a look at, because I think that they've really done just about the best single implementation of drag and drop that I've seen. What do you think?
Yeah, I totally agree. I was playing around with Castro just because of drag and drop, and the implementation totally makes sense to me. It's just so fun to pick up an episode on, on the iPhone. I think Apple doesn't currently allow drag and drop between apps, and I think they're making a mistake, because Castro shows how the system can work really well, especially because it can be combined with the Taptic engine for haptic feedback.
Right.
So when you pick up something, you feel a tap on your iPhone. And when you're holding an episode in Castro and you move to the inbox and you rearrange the episodes on the fly, where you're dragging an item over another and you feel a subtle tap on your iPhone, that is really, really nice. I've been having lots of fun using Castro to manage my listening queue with drag and drop. I think it totally works well.
And I think it's the kind of app too that works. Just because it's a podcast player doesn't mean that it's not the kind of implementation that wouldn't work on another app, because when you get down to it, Castro is organizing and managing lists of things, right? In the case of a podcast player, it's episodes of shows, but it would work, that sort of implementation I think would work just as well with a task manager or an email client for that matter. Thanks to Readle for sponsoring App Stories this week. Readle has built a complete ecosystem of productivity apps for professionals who want the very best experience, including drag and drop on iOS 11. Today, I want to tell you a little bit about Spark, Readle's email client. Readle started by building a great email client for personal use. This fall, they'll launch a new take on email for teams, and then next year they're going to incorporate artificial intelligence to provide proactive email assistance. Spark supports drag and drop in iOS 11 right out of the box. It takes your email experience to a whole new level. For instance, you can drag attachments into other Readle apps like Documents for storage or PDF Expert for annotation. You can also drag links, text, and images into Spark to make composing a new message super easy. Be sure to check out all of Readle's apps on Readle.com. We'll have a link to Spark in the show notes too. Thanks again to Readle for supporting the show.
I've been playing around with a bunch of task managers lately just because I want to, I've been using Todoist for almost a year at this point, and every once in a while I feel like I need to refresh my memory. I need to understand what the competition looks like. So I've been taking another look at different apps just to know where the task manager industry on iOS right now is standing.
Mm-hmm.
And I want to mention 3 of these apps. Of course, Todoist, but then also OmniFocus and Things. Well, I'll start from Things because it's been my favorite surprise of the bunch. We reviewed Things 3 when it launched a few months ago, and then the app won an Apple Design Award. And I just want to say that it's just so beautifully designed. A few years ago, when you said this is an app that Apple would make, that used to be a compliment. But as Apple's design has been criticized more and more, and you could argue that the software quality has gone down in recent years, that is not really a compliment anymore to say things is an app that Apple would make, because I think this is actually better than anything Apple has made. It looks fantastic, and it looks like it fits perfectly on iOS 11. But specifically for drag and drop, I think they could do better, because right now the support is kind of basic. So you can drop in text and links, basically. You can also drop in email messages, and they will be converted to tasks that have the link back to the original message in Apple Mail. But unlike the other two apps, you cannot drop in any file. You cannot drop in PDFs or photos or zip archives. You cannot do that. So right now, for drag and drop itself, I mean, it has many, many other things that I love, like the design and the Siri integration. But for drag and drop, it should be a little more flexible. OmniFocus, I think, is probably the best implementation of drag and drop on both on the iPhone and the iPad right now. You can drop in text and documents, images from other apps. You can also rearrange tasks in the app, not multiple tasks at once, but only one at a time, which I think it's a limitation that the Omni Group will improve later this year with a major update to OmniFocus. So right now you can also pick up a task in OmniFocus inside the app, and you can tap on the forecast, for example, to assign the task to a different day. So you can do a lot of things both from other apps and within OmniFocus itself, and combined with the excellent, truly the best SiriKit integration on iOS 11. Of all the task managers, OmniFocus I think has the strongest integration with SiriKit right now. So combined with that, I think if you're looking for iOS 11 updates, and especially drag and drop and Siri, OmniFocus is currently in the top position right now. But Todoist is not too bad either. In terms of drag and drop, you can drop in text, you can drop in links, you can drop in email messages, and you can either drop them in the main inbox and they will become new tasks, or you can open an existing task. You can open the comments view, and you can drop text to add a new comment, or you can drop files, any kind of file, to add an attachment to a task, this is one of the unique aspects of Todoist. You can comment on tasks and you can attach multiple files.
Right.
Which is really, really nice. And if you're the kind of person who wants to add a lot of notes to a task, or maybe a lot of attachments like PDF documents or zip archives or images, videos, anything really, drag and drop in the comment view of Todoist is really nicely done.
Yeah, I found that to be a big help. That's been available on the Mac, but it's new to iOS, and I find it useful when I'm going through emails and say I get an email from a sponsor, somebody who's got artwork and some text and other things that I want to save in a task for creating a sponsor post or something down the road. I can drag that all into the task and have it all there ready to go when I've got time to do the task. All right, Federico. Speaking of email, another app worth mentioning is Airmail, and Airmail is interesting. It handles drag and drop a little different than Apple Mail. Sometimes when you drag out, you get a link back that will return you back to Airmail, but most of the time I've found you get a PDF. So if I drag out a message, it will turn the entire email thread into a PDF attached to the note. If I drag it into Apple Notes, for instance, that doesn't include attachments. It's just the messages themselves. And I like that, I guess, if I were archiving a conversation that was an important conversation. But I think for me, more often than not, I would rather have the link back to the original message as kind of a reminder of what it was that was being said in the thread. And if the thread is updated in the meantime, that way all those messages will be there too, not just whatever was there when I actually turned it into a PDF.
Yeah, totally agree. Whenever I'm dealing with an email client, I just wish there was a setting that I could say, always give me a link to the message. Or if you really wanna overdo it, give me the subject line and the link to the message. But I never want the PDF version, and I never want the body text of the message.
Yeah, I know I heard you talking to Mike Hurley about this on Connected, and I can see Mike's point where I think Mike was describing where, oh, he's going on a trip, so he wants to save out a PDF of his plane ticket and his hotel reservation and that kind of thing. And I get that. That makes a lot of sense to me. But the times I want to do that sort of thing are few and far between compared to the times I want to actually link back to the thread and
Yep.
be able to follow the conversation later.
Yeah, exactly.
So we should talk a little bit while we still have a little bit of time about what we'd like to see coming next to drag and drop, because we've seen some really neat stuff so far, but there's a lot more that could be done. And we've got some ideas of some apps that we'd like to see. First of all, I guess, well, we've got the clock running on Google Docs, right?
Yes, this is something that Mike started on Connected. We're
I know.
checking every day if Google Docs is ever gonna get drag and drop support. And let me tell you why I'm a little skeptical right now. This can be what do the fancy podcasters call this when you do follow up for another show?
Oh, I think Mike calls it follow out, right?
So
Is that
this
right?
is this follow out? I think Mike, if Mike is listening to this episode, he will get back to me. Follow out, follow in, follow up. Who knows anymore, really? My concern is that Google Docs is using a custom text rendering engine. Just like their UI framework took them months to accommodate size classes in iOS 9, I fear that the custom text stuff that Google is doing in Google Docs doesn't work with drag and drop just yet, and it will take them a while before it's fixed. Now, I would be super happy to be proven wrong here, and that maybe the work that Google put in 2 years ago for iOS 9 will pay off in iOS 11 too, and they will be able to support drag and drop in just a few weeks. That would be excellent. But if they don't, I think this is the most likely explanation.
There's still enough that feels custom when you're using Google Docs that I'm not super optimistic that we're going to see it in a few weeks, but you're right. They did do a lot to support iOS 9, so maybe we'll see something.
Yeah.
Another thing that we've seen that's been teased by the Ulysses team is drag and drop for Ulysses, which I think will be nice. What's been teased, I think, is fairly basic. It's mostly reorganizing sheets within the app and not dragging things in and out of the app. But it's a start because, for instance, say we're working on the weekly newsletter and I've got 5 or 6 different documents that I'm working on for that. I usually use my Mac to move those to an archive at some point. I don't usually do that on iOS just because it's simpler on a Mac. But with drag and drop, I could do that pretty easily.
Yeah, I really cannot wait for Ulysses to have all these features. I was taking a look at on Twitter today, and there was Max from the Ulysses team. He was talking about how there are like 300 user feature requests being fixed in the upcoming Ulysses 12 update, and stuff like inline image previews. He mentioned, like, I'm super excited about that because
that would be really nice.
That would be really nice. What I want to see, John, is an RSS reader with drag and drop support in the main list of articles. So right now, the closest I have to this is iKnowReader. I can tap on an article, open the story on the right side of the iPad app, and I can press and hold on the title in the article view. And then I can drag and drop that. But what I want is I want to tap and hold on the short snippet in the article list, not in the article view, in the article list. I just want to tap and hold there and drop it somewhere else. And I think they're working on this. They sent me a tweet today showing the feature in action. So fingers crossed, I think iKnowReader will be first. I know that the RSS reader market is really dried down lately. I don't think Reader will get an update for iOS 11, and Newsify, which is a popular option, especially for Feedly users. But Newsify got an update for iOS 11, but they don't support drag and drop at all. So I don't know. Maybe either Unread or iKnowReader will support the feature in the short term. That's my hope.
It seems like such a natural for an RSS reader. I mean, especially if you're doing research, to be able to take links and just drag them out of a list straight into notes is the perfect implementation for that sort of thing.
Right. Yeah, totally. So we'll see.
What else? Overcast
and podcasts. Yeah, totally.
Yeah. Just in general. I mean, I think what we've seen with Castro demonstrates that it's a good way to organize your queue. Even if you're more of a playlist-based podcast, I think that there's room to manually reorder those things using drag and drop. I think that that's a good implementation. I'd like to see it come to more apps.
Yeah, yeah, and especially for me, it would be things like exporting show notes or dropping in
Right.
feeds to subscribe. Stuff like that also would be useful in addition to management. So yeah, I have two dreams here. One is workflow. We're gonna talk about it in a minute, but the other is Trello. Just because Trello is it seems like a perfect fit for drag and drop. You already use drag and drop inside Trello because the app is entirely based on the idea of, you navigate all these Kanban boards and these columns and you pick up a card and you drop it somewhere else. So that has always been the whole idea behind Trello. But what I want to be able to turn stuff from other apps into cards in Trello when I drop them in, or I want to be able to bring in text and to bring in attachments and add them to an existing card. So hopefully, the Trello team, I think, of all these big companies that have multi-platform support, like Todoist, I would say, they are among the better ones that tend to support new iOS features relatively quickly. So I'm optimistic that Trello will soon follow with drag and drop on iOS 11.
Yeah, I'd like to see a couple of other apps too. I'm just going to go through these quickly. But for instance, I was using Pixelmator the other day to work on some screenshots, and you have to go through a browser in order to bring in photos from the photo library. I'd really like to be able to just put those side by side and drag things in and just edit them, get 2-3 screenshots, put them side by side, resize them, and then fire them off and send them to our CDN so that it can be uploaded to the website. That would be a really great implementation, I think.
I should mention, as a conclusion, workflow. I really hope that the
Yes.
workflow team is working on an iOS 11 update. I think I have a good feeling about that, considering how they've been updating the app since they joined Apple. And what I want to see is stuff like, I want to be able to drop in anything from another app and to have my drag item trigger a workflow. Like I want to be able, for example, to drag and drop a photo on top of a workflow and do things like resize the photo or upload the photo somewhere else. Or I want to pick up a link and drop it on top of my Mac Stories Weekly workflow so it gets saved as a link for the newsletter. Stuff like that. I think there would be lots of potential for workflow becoming like drag and drop for automation. Basically, you pick up stuff and you drop it into a workflow and you execute actions based on what you just dropped.
Right.
So it would be like the best of both worlds, best of drag and drop and the best of automation on iOS.
Yeah, because a lot of what you just described are things that we do now with the workflow extension, where you have to first go through the share sheet and then do those things. And with drag and drop, you cut out a bunch of those steps.
Yeah, exactly. So fingers crossed, we're going to see workflow for iOS 11.
All right, Federico. Well, I think that's probably enough for this week. We've got so much more to talk about, especially with respect to drag and drop and some of these other unique iOS 11 features. But we don't want to go much longer, so we'll stop there. Thanks again to our two sponsors, Balance and Readle. And as always, you can find both of us writing at macstories.net and on Twitter, where Federico is at Viticci, that's VITICCI, and I'm at John Voorhees, JOHN VOORHWS. Talk to you next week, Federico.
Ciao, John.